they come on without their mics muted, I'll mute them.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, then we'll get started. All right. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Today, the Northeast Berks Chamber of Commerce is happy to host another Zoom presentation. Today, we have a chamber member partner presentation on a very timely and relevant subject. We're talking about crisis planning and business continuity planning. But before we get started with our presentation, I'd like to remind you to keep yourself on mute. And if you do have a question during the course of the presentation, if it's related specifically to a topic that's being addressed at that moment, we will take a question or two. But feel free to use chat to pose questions, and we can also follow through on answering those questions at the end of our presentation. We expect our presentation to take about an hour today between the two presenters. So let me say that, of course, we're very happy to welcome, as I said, two of our members. Our first one is Russell Farbiars, Esquire. He is a managing partner for Antonavage Farbiars in Hamburg, PA. And Russell, I don't know if you realize this, but this summer will mark the 10-year anniversary of your chamber membership. So we're very pleased about that. Our second presenter is Benjamin Hawes. He is the owner of Hawes Financial Group in Kutztown. He is a certified financial planner and a wealth manager. Welcome, Ben, who this summer will be recognizing a one-year anniversary with the Northeast Berks Chamber. We know that during a time like COVID-19, and we're now in our fourth month of the pandemic, businesses of any size need to keep their essential functions moving along. They need to keep them going because anytime there's downtime, there is a cost. And of course, during a crisis like this pandemic, there are certainly many legal and financial considerations to be made. And are you ready to face a crisis in your business? Or are you able to recover from one? So today, we're going to hear from both of these gentlemen on the topic of crisis planning and business continuity planning. And we'll start with you, Russell. Welcome.
Thank you. And of course, it wouldn't be a presentation by a lawyer if we didn't start with a disclaimer. So there we go. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me. My practice is focused primarily on estate planning and administration, small business counseling, and real estate. Next slide, please. So what we're gonna be addressing today are a couple things. First, we're gonna do some introductions. We'll talk a little bit about corporate governance, estate and disability planning, and developing your succession plan. I am going to talk as fast as I can because I probably have 2+ hours of content to get into about 30 minutes. I see that Kim Davis is on the call. She had invited me to do a presentation similar to this about a year ago. Of course, we did not talk about a pandemic, but certainly she can attest to the fact that this presentation can go on for a long time. So the first thing we want to talk about is what is the importance of planning? So if the worst could happen, you use your little raise your hand thing on Zoom if you thought that you were ever going to have to close your business because of a pandemic. Yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna check that. What we have to think about is when the worst happens, do we have a plan? Let's think about some of the most basic things. What if you couldn't get to work, but you needed your office to be open? Are you the only one with the keys? Can someone else access your computer? Does anyone else have the passwords? A new one related to computers that I don't think we all really thought too much about is, can you access your digital files remotely? Are you on the cloud? If you're not on the cloud, do you have the ability to log into your server? What about financial decisions? Who can make decisions? Who can write checks? Does anyone know what projects are in process? Do you have systems developed for managing projects? Next slide. So it's important to have a plan. I mean, some of this is, you're all business leaders. I don't need to tell you that having a plan creates stability, but it also helps preserve the value of your business, because there are a lot of businesses that could not or would not make it through a pandemic or some other disaster because they didn't have a plan for how to deal with an emergency, and they weren't able to keep their business going. The next section we're going to talk about is corporate governance. The corporate governance is just sort of a fancy way for how is your business structured from the legal perspective. Next slide, please. So there are a couple different ways to structure a business. One of the simplest way is as a sole proprietor. And a lot of times when people start a business out, if it's just them, that's probably the way they're going to start out. There is no distinction between you as the owner and the business. The business is operated under your social security number. The business is you and you are the business. You don't have any liability protection. And most of the time you're going to have to register your name as a fictitious name, which is essentially the same as registering a doing business as name. Next slide, please. The next way to have a business is a corporation. This is probably the most formal structure that exists. You start a corporation by filing what are called articles of incorporation with the Department of State. That's a relatively simple document. You also need to have bylaws, which are essentially the laws that govern your corporation. And there are a lot of formalities that need to be met. So you need to have an annual meeting every year. You need to have meeting minutes. There's maintenance that has to happen with a corporation on an ongoing basis. If you don't do those things, you could lose the benefit of having the corporation by not having the liability protection that you would otherwise have. And then you have to have there are some tax considerations with corporations, and really with any of these business entities, that you want to talk with your accountant about the benefits of an S Corp or a small business corporation, which essentially is a pass-through entity, versus a C Corp, which is not a pass-through entity, meaning that you would have taxation both at the corporation and an individual level. Next slide, please. Another method that is often used is what's called a partnership. You can have a partnership that forms sort of almost organically or naturally, because a partnership under the law is just two or more individuals carrying on business. You don't have to have an agreement, but why wouldn't you? Because you want to think about, unfortunately, when you're forming a business with someone else, you want to think about not only its success but its failure, and what might happen if things don't work out. And that's why it's always important to have a formal agreement. A partnership is a pass-through entity. You can elect S Corp status. I'm not going to get into the difference between not S Corp and non-S Corp because it's a little bit beyond the purview of today's topic. You want to make sure you have a name registration. There are ways to form what are called limited partnerships. So a limited partnership would generally have a general partner who manages the day-to-day business, and would have limited partners whose liability is limited typically this structure is used in some sort of an investment vehicle where you have limited partners who are essentially investors in the main business. And then you can also have a limited liability partnership, which as its name implies, provides certain limited liability and requires, and both of these types of partnerships would require registration with the Pennsylvania Department of State. Next slide, please. Probably the most popular business structure at this point is a limited liability company. And the reason for that is that it's probably the most flexible structure that exists. It can look like a corporation. It can look like a partnership. In certain respects, it can look like a sole proprietorship. It doesn't have any of those formalities that we talked about. You don't have to have an annual meeting. From a tax perspective, it's pretty flexible. You can be taxed as a partnership. You can be taxed as a corporation, be taxed as an S corporation. It's formed by filing a very simple document called a Certificate of Organization with the Department of State. An LLC can be formed with only one person. So it can be your alternative to sole proprietorship so that you can obtain some limited liability. Now, what I do tell my clients when they say, well, I'm the only person and I want to form an LLC, is I say, the LLC will not protect you from liability from your negligence. So if you're the one committing the negligent act, you still could have some liability. But if you have employees, you absolutely want to have an LLC because now you can insulate yourself from their negligence. The way that an LLC is governed is through what's called an operating agreement. Even when it's just you, I strongly urge you to have an operating agreement because that creates sort of that third party relationship, so that if anyone later were to try to say that the LLC is a sham, you could say, no, I've had this operating agreement since day one, and this is how I'm functioning. Next slide, please. All right, so some best practices. You want to create those corporate government documents I talked about. The bylaws, your partnership agreements, your operating agreements, and you want to update them. You want to make sure you look at them. You want to make sure that they are custom tailored to your business and your practices and the things that are important to you. Don't go to LegalZoom and get that cookie cutter document, because I can tell you that those cookie cutter documents, when things go wrong, land you in court because they are not specific enough to help you. And the whole reason that you do all of this planning is to avoid those crisis reactions that end you up in court. You want to document your corporate actions. If you have a corporation, you want to follow the formalities. You want to write things down. You want to have a minute book. You want to do your annual meeting minutes. It really doesn't take very long. If you need help doing it, an attorney can help you with it. It doesn't even have to be something super formal. It can simply be just writing down, okay, I bought this year, I did this, I looked at the financials, everything's good, okay, let me put it in the book. You just want to keep those records because those records are what maintain the fact or tell everyone the fact that you are following those formalities and that your corporation is in fact a real corporation and not just a shell or a covering for yourself. You want to maintain organized files with these source documents for important transactions. So you want to have an actual file that is easily accessible. I would strongly urge digital at this point in time. It's not hard to, if you use something like Dropbox or some other cloud-based storage to have a folder that just stores all of these documents. I will tell you that I'm working with Kim Davis to release an easy way to organize this in the coming months. So we'll make sure that everyone in the chamber gets information on that once we have released that. That'll be a digital product that'll help you organize these documents. You want to make sure that you have in there bank statements, invoices, credit card receipts. Think about the things that someone other than you would need to see on a regular basis. Next slide, please. All right. So a buy-sell agreement. This is a critically important agreement to have. I can't see Ben's face on my screen, but I'm sure he's agreeing with me because you won't find a financial advisor who doesn't strongly urge a buy-sell agreement, because what a buy-sell agreement does is it creates the parameters for what happens if a partner or a member of an LLC or a shareholder leaves the organization. I feel so strongly about these agreements that when I prepare an operating agreement for a multi-member LLC, I am automatically include in my services what's called a members agreement, which is this buy-sell agreement, because it is something that is so critical that, in my opinion, it is part of forming the corporation properly and responsibly, or the company properly and responsibly. It's a legally binding agreement, and it addresses a whole number of issues that we hope as people that we never ever have to talk about, but having it written down and resolved makes the world of difference. So you've got to, first is, what if it doesn't work out and someone needs to leave? You need to have what that process is going to be for someone to give notice that they want to leave. Can they sell their share? Who can they sell it to? Do they have to sell it just to another member, or can they sell it on the open market? Remember, in a small or close corporation, you have chosen to go into business with particular people. You don't want to now be in business with a stranger. So there are a lot of times there are restrictions on who the business interest can be sold to, and there are restrictions or there are rights of first refusal that are granted to the company. You also have to plan for bankruptcy. What if one of the parties is divorced? What if someone passes away, or what if someone becomes disabled? These are all situations where that could trigger a requirement to purchase the interest of another party. And so it's also a good place to think about life insurance, because you may be able to use life insurance or keyman insurance to create the funding opportunities that are necessary for some of these arrangements. All right, next slide. And so the next topic we're going to talk about is estate and disability planning. So first thing, what is estate planning? Estate planning is the process of determining who will get your assets upon your death. So when we talk about estate planning, we're talking about things like wills, trusts. Maybe you want to do some gifting, joint ownership. Planning is important because if you write your own documents and create binding documents, you get to determine the course of how your assets will be distributed. If you don't, there are local laws that will determine that. And then you also have to always keep in mind that there is, unfortunately, inheritance tax that it sometimes comes into play as part of the decision making. So if you don't do any estate planning, there are local default rules. If you want to go to the next slide, please. There are local default rules, which are called the rules of intestate succession, that plan and govern the process. You don't have control over who your fiduciary is or who your executor or administrator is. The law would determine who that's going to be. And then you don't have any control over who inherits from you, because again, the law has decided who's going to inherit from you. And I can tell you that, you know, the rules that are associated with this were drafted in the 1950s. Families in the 1950s don't look the way families in 2020 look. So the rules often don't fit. So that's even more why it's even more important that you plan. And because of the structure, you could end up with paying inheritance tax, because you might have distributions to people who you may not have chosen to have distributions to. And so there's always the possibility that the tax will be increased. Next slide, please. So what happens if you don't do any of your disability planning? So disability, if you don't do disability planning, you could end up having a guardianship, which is a formal court proceeding where the court appoints a guardian to make decisions for you as and you're referred to as the incapacitated person. This is not an efficient process, and you know it's not efficient because the court's involved. There are time delays, and then you have judges who are making decisions about who can make your financial and healthcare decisions. Because you have to go to court all the time to make decisions, there's an increased cost. And it's not a flexible scenario, because when you think about it, the court has to decide everything from who's going to be making the decisions to, if you have to sell a piece of real estate, you have to get the court's permission to do it. So it's going to cost more and not be flexible. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna try to run through a couple of tools that you could use. A lot of these are probably very familiar to you. A last will and testament is your basic estate planning document. There's no one on this call, and probably no one, just about no one out there who shouldn't have a will. A will does a couple of major things. One, it would appoint who your executor is going to be, who will administer your estate. It establishes your inheritance scheme, who gets your stuff. It can establish trusteeships or guardianships for your children. You can both protect your children financially, and you can also establish who your children would live with. Wills are limited, though. They only address probate assets that you own during your lifetime. It doesn't address things like jointly owned bank accounts or retirement accounts or anything of that nature. Next slide, please. That's why this whole concept of will coordination is very important, because you, in conjunction with looking at your will, you want to look at your financial accounts or contracts or policies, your annuities, life insurance, individual retirement accounts, whether or not you have transfer and death designations on any bank accounts, how your accounts are titled, and your real estate, because you want to make sure that, you know, if you're trying to benefit all your children equally, have you done that not only in your will, but have you done that in your other documents, in your other accounts? And just a word to the wise, you know, it could be very, very tempting to say, well, I'm going to create transfers on death designations on every account. I'm going to create beneficiaries. I'm going to have everything be jointly owned. And then, you know, because I don't want to have a probate estate. Well, the problem is that you're going to have probate debts. And I have seen more than one occasion where this strategy has been employed, and it has been detrimental and made the administration of the estate almost impossible. So it's important to coordinate with your will, but not replace it. Next slide, please. Another option is a revocable living trust. A revocable living trust is an entity that holds title to property for the benefit of others who are referred to as beneficiaries. It can be changed and rescinded by the person who creates it. A couple of reasons that it could be used is for probate avoidance. It can also be used for incapacity planning because trustees can often have a bit more flexibility than agents under a power of attorney. So it's something to consider, particularly in the context of a business, just in the sense that it could give someone else the ability to make certain decisions. It also is a good tool for planning for blended families because you can set them up so that a husband and wife can make an estate plan that cannot be changed after the death of the first spouse. And then there can also be some more sophisticated planning included within it. This is a topic that we could probably spend an hour on, so I'm not going to. I'm just trying to give you sort of the 30,000-foot view here on some of these things. So a durable power of attorney, if you want to switch to the next slide, please. A durable power of attorney is probably the most powerful document that you would ever sign. It allows another person to be you in the financial sense and to make financial decisions on your behalf. What's important to note is that if you're going to do a power of attorney and you're a small business owner, you want to make sure that there are specific business powers that are included in that power of attorney. It allows you can actually specify in your power of attorney that there are that you want your agent to be able to exercise powers over your business in the event that you are not able to. And that could be really crucial in a situation where something unexpected has happened to you. Next slide. So the power of attorney, as I said, it designates someone who can make financial decisions for you during your lifetime. So this is not something that comes into effect after you've died. It's something it's a tool for addressing disability during your lifetime or incapacity. It's effective on the day that you execute it and will remain effective even after you become incapacitated or disabled. That's what makes it durable. If you see the phrase durable power of attorney, this is what makes it considered a durable power of attorney. Just some terminology: the principal is the person who gives the power, and the agent is the person who is acting on behalf of a principal pursuant to the power of attorney. Next slide. Most financial powers of attorney authorize an agent to do a number of tasks, but the most important tasks, or the most common tasks, are opening and closing bank accounts. That also can include signing checks, selling real estate, defending in litigation, making limited or unlimited gifts, creating a revocable trust for the benefit of the principal. And the thing that's not on this list, but that you definitely, I mentioned before, is allowing another person to make important business decisions. Next slide, please. So what does your agent have to do for you? Your agent must act in accordance with your reasonable expectations. That means your agent must act how they would expect that you would act. This is a non-waivable duty. That means your agent cannot just do whatever they think. They have to do what would be best for you and what you would expect. And then the agent must sign a certification before the document is valid that they understand that this is their obligation. Next slide, please. I'm just going to touch really quickly on healthcare power of attorney. And you might say, well, this is a business seminar. Why do we care about healthcare? Well, it's important because someone has to be making these decisions. Healthcare power of attorney authorizes your agent to do certain things, such as consent to surgery and other treatment, withdraw treatment, etc. And it's effective when you can no longer express your wishes. Next slide is a living will. Again, a living will are written healthcare instructions regarding end-of-life decisions, and it's effective when you don't have the ability to give directions regarding the use of artificial life-sustaining procedures, and your physician determines that death is imminent if artificial life-sustaining procedures are not utilized. Next slide, please. So it's important to think about who should be your agent. you know, I have a lot of clients who they just default to, well, who's the oldest child? Well, you got to think, is that the right person? Should it be the most local child? Do you want the same person for your financial and healthcare decisions? And what about for business decisions? You don't have to have the same person who handles your personal financial affairs as the person who would handle your business affairs. You can actually bifurcate those duties. If you have someone who you think would be a good person to run your business, but it's not necessarily the same person who you'd want in your running your personal affairs, then that's something that's possible as well. Next slide. All right. So some things to think about in picking your agent, particularly in the current climate. Do you want one agent or multiple agents? In the past, I would always I would often recommend multiple agents as a good idea, because it creates a check on people. But you got to think, in the age of COVID-19, what if you have an agent that's in self-isolation or self-quarantine or themselves becomes incapacitated? So now you have a problem where, perhaps you have two agents who have to act together, but they can't actually do that. And so then it also raises the question of, should you require your agents to act jointly, individually, or should you use a majority rules paradigm? Next slide, please. When you pick your agent, you really need to pick someone who has these three skills: who's trusted, responsible, and skilled. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for. So you have some decisions to make. How will your designee operate your business? Do you want whoever you have designated to take over your business to assume ownership? How are they going to assume that ownership? Are you gonna gift the business to them? Is it going to be contained in a buy-sell agreement? Are they going to buy it? So these are all things that you have to think about, and I would encourage you to write these things down, and store those things. Store these. Both in a digital and written format. Next slide, please. Now you also have to consider, is your business going to continue after your death or disability or not? If it's not, you want to have documented how it's going to be dissolved. And a lot of times this can be done in your buy-sell agreement or in your operating agreement or bylaws, but how are you going to derive the most value? Is it going to be an asset sale, an equipment sale? Are you going to try to sell the stock or the membership interest in the company? And who's going to be in charge of that? Is it going to be your power of attorney? Is it going to be a trustee? Is it going to be an executor? All right, so I've just tried to race through over the last 38 minutes all of these topics, really just to get to this point here, and it's that you need to create a disaster plan. If you didn't think you needed one before, we've all learned in the last 4 months. Lori, I can't believe it's been 4 months that we've been operating in this way. But we've all learned over the last 4 months that without having a disaster plan, we just sort of spin our wheels and just keep trying to make it work. So create a disaster plan. It can be a binder. It can be a document on your computer. It can be a document on your cloud drive. And it really, you need to have all of your important documents. Think about your tax ID number, your sales tax or unemployment numbers, license numbers, operations manuals, important contracts, whatever someone would need to pick up your business and run it from the administrative perspective. And again, I mentioned before that Kim Davis and I are working on a tool to sort of help put all of this together in one place for you. Some other things to include would be financial information, tax returns, access to your accounting system, perhaps the name of your bookkeeper if you don't do your own books. So, things that on a daily basis you just wouldn't necessarily think about. Next slide, please. And you may also consider your estate planning documents just so that there's a copy of, who the power of attorney is, your buy-sell agreements, your life insurance policies. So all this stuff is in one place. Okay. Thank you. I know that was sort of the rush through, but I'm certainly happy if anyone has individual questions to talk about it. So thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Russell. I mean, we know that this information is so vital to individuals, business owners, and even nonprofit organizations. And this presentation today is recorded, so it will be available on the Northeast Berks Chamber YouTube channel as well.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll move on to the second part of our presentation today with Ben Hawes.
Great, and thank you, of course, to Russell, to Lori, to Abigail, all those who coordinated this and for inviting me to be a part of the presentation. I know it's a difficult topic and certainly difficult and complex world we're living in right now. It's not exactly uplifting content, but thank you, Russell, for being so clear and going through it. You did a great job. This topic of business planning, I'd say especially after what we've experienced the last few months or so, it's of course a very important one. But I think that the key takeaway probably from Russell and myself today is that, we need help with these things from time to time. We're busy. As business owners, we're absorbed with working in the business. We're running operations. We're small business owners too. We get it. Lack of time and resources and sometimes the energy to do these things is a problem. So I know it sounds like a lot to do. It's sometimes unfamiliar terms. It's daunting. First, congratulate yourselves. You made the time to be here today and start that conversation, and that's really important. But then recognize that we want to bring you these resources. You don't have to go find them. And believe it or not, again, I'll speak for Russell, this boring content is stuff that actually excites us. A little nerd alert here. But it's why we're so fortunate to have a chamber like this, bring people together, support each other, share resources. So again, thank you to Lori. Thanks to Kim too for the topics like the 9 o'clock club bring. It's really important. So I'll try to speed through here too. My agenda, I want to give you just a real brief introduction to who the financial group is, simply to give you context on why we talk about these types of things and what role we play. Second, I want to talk about the resources for right now. That came from the CARES Act. Hopefully you've been aware of the CARES Act and certain provisions, the PPP, Small Business Administration loans. There's a lot out there and significant changes were made just last week. So this is timely. I want to spend some time there. And then third, the theme for today, we're talking about business continuity, what that means on my side of things, what documents might be important, what that might include, and of course, what that means in the world of financial planning. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up. If there are questions, we'll connect you to resources. Again, all of that in 17 minutes. So let's jump into it. If I can go to the next slide. Again, very briefly, my name is Benjamin Hawes, in practice for close to 14 years now. A 3-person team. Adam and I are both certified financial planners. The reason I want to bring that up, why it's important, all the fiduciary laws and best interest laws that are out there, it really just means that we're obligated to work in your best interest. In short, we get paid to give advice, not sell things. We put up there our 6 core values because I think it's really important to kind of understand what we value and what we want to bring to that relationship with you. And we like to say that our mission is to help you be the best version of yourself. That's bringing accountability to the things you need to get done, encourage positive change, simplify your life, and bring a team mentality to this. So the next slide, if you could. We do that through a 5-step process. You can get advice anywhere. There's 270,000 advisors out there. Robots can do part of this job too. But a lot of that's just math and formulas. So we believe the only way to truly help you is to fully understand how you think and feel about money, what matters most to you, assess where you're at today, and put the pieces of that puzzle together to formulate a plan that talks about next steps, who needs to do them, and by when they need to get done. And then of course, track that over time because life is forever evolving. And that next slide, that does lead, we do invest money. People have to build wealth some way, and there's different ways to do that. There, of course, is stock market, bond market, there's real estate, business owners. Clearly, we want to build value in our business. Our point is how you should go about doing that is a very personal process and can only be determined through what we call planning. Then we want to discuss things like risk, liquidity needs, bucketing different assets, due diligence. I'll let that be the last of the introduction, I believe, going to that next slide. And to tie it all together, we believe it's really important for everyone, especially business owners, to have a team of people. People like Russell, you need an attorney, you need a CPA. We believe you need a financial planner. They all should be connected and working together. And in some cases, many cases, people should have specialists too that may not be involved in every decision, but certainly we need subject matter experts that can be called in when needed, bankers, insurance agents, trustees. So again, especially as business owners, we think relationships are really important, that you fill all these roles. Okay, let's jump into then the meat of my presentation. Who would have thought I would have said a huge piece of legislation from 2 months ago would feel old by now, but things are changing and unraveling quickly. So a quick recap. The CARES Act was a government response to this global pandemic. I think somebody gets paid to be very creative with these titles, right? CARES Act, Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security. That's $2 trillion of emergency fiscal stimulus. And I believe it really was intended to touch all different walks of life. And in some ways that has occurred. So if we could jump to that next slide. $2 trillion is a lot of money, and this slide is very jumbled here, and I apologize for that. But I think, certainly for the sake of today, follow the flow of money. That was $350 billion in small business loans available. It wasn't the smoothest, but in 14 days, the Small Business Administration funded 14 years worth of loans. And that meant that they really were required, and Congress did come together. Again, wonderful to think that in a very divided world and divided politics, this was almost unanimous in how they supported this to really get money into the pockets of Main Street here. They approved another $310 billion at the end of April. And my understanding is there's still about $110 billion left for loan. So if this is not something you've explored, there still is an opportunity to do that. And really, as much as there was some press, I think, to the negative side of big institutions getting this money, I believe there was some truth to that. There were some flaws when anything happens as quickly as that did. It has now been 4.4 million different loans for about the 500 billion that went out. So average size loan is about $100,000, and that does mean that a lot of small businesses got to tap into this. So if I could jump to the next slide. Again, I think there was something in this for everyone, and we're going to focus on the last column on the right, the small business benefits. But, right off the bat, us as individuals, and Russell hit this well, whether you structure your business a certain way or not, there were other ways that if you have needs, if you are in a difficult, tough spot right now, unable to work, there are some other things that I just think are really important to note before we go into the business owner specifics. And that's going to be, the second column there. If you did have savings that were in retirement accounts, I just want to acknowledge that, in our world, you can tap into those IRA dollars at this point without penalty, regardless of your age. And that's not normally the case. There usually is a tax penalty for doing so. So translation is, while it's not ideal, if you did need to tap into those extra dollars, there may be resources there. And I think it's really important that you talk to advisors if you're in that situation. Maybe you have a cash reserve. At this point, I think it's important to talk to service providers. I think certain banking institutions have been trying to be very generous about suspending payments. If you still have student loans, there were provisions to suspend that. Home equity lines of credit. There's a lot of different ways that I think you can tap into resources if you are in a tough spot. But I do want to focus on that last column. So if I could go to the next slide. I think it's really important to talk to your CPA, talk to your bank, talk to people like us. As I mentioned, there's still money out there, but I think the most popular small business owner program in the CARES Act is the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loan. What that stipulated is that if you do have payroll, and that's a key if, depending on the structure of your business, Russell called that corporate governance. But if you do have payroll, the purpose of the program was to allow you to keep that payroll going and have a pool of money available to do so. And that was up to 250% of your payroll. So simple math, if you have a $30,000 a month payroll, maybe it's you, maybe it's some other people included, you could get a loan for up to $75,000. That's how that math worked. But what changed, and what I want to kind of focus on, because this is really new news, is the repayment of that. That was going to be forgiven. That loan is a forgivable loan if you use at least 60% of those loan dollars towards payroll. It was 75%, and that came down to 60. So that does allow you to use the other 40% on mortgages, rent, utilities, other things that you need to operate. And again, if you do use it in that way, it can be forgiven. And that money was to cover payrolls for 8 weeks from the onset of when you received the loan. That's now out as far as 24 weeks or through the end of the year. So there's a lot of more flexibility with this. Again, there's still money on the table. If you had not explored it, but now you're starting to understand that maybe it is something you should, again, certainly bring your team of professionals together. There certainly are other resources that we would point you to on our website, and I'm sure you can get from, again, your CPA or your lenders as well. I'll jump to that next slide then and kind of pivot to, again, bunch of resources. We put a lot out on our website. You're welcome to plug into that. Next slide, if I could. So lastly, in our last couple minutes here, I will talk about what we mean by business continuity planning. And this differs a little bit from succession planning and the other legal documents that Russell discussed, but the content is somewhat similar here. And Lori, your intro is really great. This really is about communications and preparation for disruption. And what I do want to highlight is what is different about my part of that conversation today is this is for you, not for somebody else to pick up your business, as Russell is mentioning. It's really important to have those documents. My idea here is that you have a document that can spring you into action in a timely manner when there is some sort of major disruption. So let me start by kind of saying, in my world, we're forced to have this, right? While 90% of my work is advice-driven, there's services too. When people need access to money, they need access to money. It doesn't matter whether it's a pandemic, a flood, the electricity goes out, you name a disruption, we have to have a plan to continue our operations. So this is the opening line of our business continuity plan. And I think the key line is the second one. The purpose is for this manual is to document plans for the recovery of our critical systems in the event of disruption. So let's go to the next slide. What does a document like this include? Russell hit on some of this, but I want to be clear that this doesn't have to be a formal document. This document is, again, for you. So your line of business, your customers, your key persons, your vendors, employees, the point is to have access to the same information. And if we can think back to pre-COVID-19 world, hard to do. But if we all had the hindsight of knowing that this was coming, what would we have done differently? Right? What would we have wanted to prepare? What did we spend maybe the first few weeks trying to figure out? That is exactly what I think this type of document should have. So a couple key bullet points of what's in ours and what I would encourage. Put your Rolodex in here. Who are the key contacts that you need? Not only employees, but vendors, customers, anything that gives you a quick reference guide that you don't have to go seeking information out. If you have a CRM, a client or customer, relationship management system, we really encourage, and I think this world that we are now living in has forced us to be more technology savvy if we weren't beforehand, right? Who knew what Zoom was before all of this? Cloud-based file systems. Russell mentioned Dropbox. We use Dropbox to have the access to information from anywhere, whether you have to be trapped in your home or whether you can get back into an office or your retail store, whatever it is. Remote deposit systems. Again, there's so much technology out there, and I think it's really important for us to start to embrace it. And I think it's also really important, your individual processes and procedures, to know how you're going to go about certain things and how you can start to leverage maybe other people that can support you in those ways if you need to call them into action. So again, I know that this may sound a little simple, a little basic at this point, and Russell hit on much of this, but I really encourage you to do it anyway, especially in a time of crisis. Time is money. How can you pivot quickly? How can you get things up and running? How quickly can you communicate to your base just to be able to say, hey, I'm here, I'm available, I'm prepared. I know many of us probably got those messages from, many different, vendors that we communicate with or that we kind of plug into. I know for me, communication was the most important thing during these last couple months. So this type of document allows you to kind of jump into that kind of mode where you can communicate effectively and quickly. And I think that's what it's meant to do, kind of be a roadmap for a difficult time. I'll jump to the next slide. In the last couple minutes, business continuity planning does kind of fit right back to basics. So I know while, part of Russell's presentation too were what he would consider some estate planning basics. I think part of planning for the future and future disruptions is just financial planning basics. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but I'll kind of wrap up my presentation going through this. And I know that, again, I'll publicly admit certain things, right? I don't always practice what I preach either, but like many other business owners, I pour money into, my own business, my heart and soul of this, trying to make it work harder and better for me when I maybe should be diverting. And I wish maybe more so leading into a difficult time like this, that you did build a cash reserve. You put something aside for a rainy day that's not tied to the business. I think it's really important for us to all reassess that now. What's appropriate for you is really based on your own individual situation, your own business operations, but that kind of has to be first and foremost. Second, get insurance coverages. I know it's not popular to talk about insurance. There's many different options tied back to what Russell discussed with life and disability, but also property and casualty too. We as a country are experiencing some very difficult times, not only economically, but a lot of disruption on main streets. And I think it's just really important to use this and all that negativeness to kind of think back to, what we need to do to prepare for our future too, and our role as business owners, but also protecting the things that, the community really relies on us for, our small businesses. Tax planning, I think, this is the one most business owners are pretty good at, because they know the importance of making sure that they don't pay more than their fair share. But I think that does tie back to how you structure things. So it's really important that, that be a part of your plan here too. Business evaluations have to be a part of financial planning for you. Russell hit on the sale and the prep side of it. I think, where I saw it come into play for certain people in the community too was having an evaluation to be able to go to certain lenders and say, here's what the formal evaluation of my business is if I need to borrow money at a difficult time. And it's also really important if you're trying to then team up during a difficult time like this to develop partnerships. Retirement, I think you have to diversify your wealth. And the only point I wanted to make here, there was some changes through the Secure Act, different from the CARES Act at the end of 2019, that does allow small business owners to come together. They call it a modified employer plan, where the operational costs of having a retirement plan for a small business owner can kind of be shared. So very unique, but is an interesting way if you find yourself in a fortunate situation, able to save some dollars. I think it's really important to diversify your wealth as a business owner in that way. And of course, estate planning. Russell hit on this. I'm not going to belabor that point. But he did make a key point in from my side of this. It's important to make sure that all financial accounts have beneficiary designations. We see that being missed more often than I care to admit. They need to be there on any and all financial accounts, and that does supersede a will. So it's really important, again, to have the partnership between these important documents and the professionals in your life. I guess my last thing to share is, we did do a 6-part series dedicated specifically to business owners. That might have been 2 or 3 years ago now, but it is on our blog site on kind of the financial planning process, 6-part process for business owners. And if you want to tap into that, again, these are free educational resources that we're really happy to share with our community of friends. Last, you can find us, Google it. HaasFinancialGroup.com, HaasFinancialGroup.blog. We do put it out a weekly e-newsletter. That's, again, a free resource of what we find important for the week. We're out on Facebook, LinkedIn. We're here to support our community if you're looking for that type of information. 10 o'clock on the dot. We did it.
Great job, Ben. Thank you so much. Anne Marie, you have a question for Ben?
Yeah, you said there was new things last week, so I didn't know. So Al and I, we hadn't been paying ourselves on our business, so we didn't qualify for any PPP. Has anything have changed with that?
So unfortunately, no, it does not seem like that PPP is going to be the #1 resource, but I know the Small Business Administration did have their own lending that was available. And I found out recently last week that even sorry, I got a truck going around the corner here. I know that our local Greater Reading Alliance has programs right now too, to try to get money into the hands of some of the businesses that I would say got lost in the shuffle here. I think it's really a shame, my opinion here, and I'm going out on a limb by saying it, but it's a shame that payroll protection program really did not fit the mold for business owners that weren't kind of paying themselves salary payroll that way. So the changes that occurred to that PPP loan were more on time frame and the forgiveness of it based on how much was allocated towards different resources.
Yeah.
But I think the small business.
We did apply for EIDL, but we still didn't get anything from that either. So
They are, they're overloaded, they're overworked. I'm, hoping and like we all are and praying that things move a little bit quicker now, that certainly some of these agencies are able to, move into the yellow here too.
thank you.
Any other questions for Russell or Ben? All right, well, we'll conclude our presentation today. The Northeast Berks Chamber is very pleased to bring 2 experts on business continuity planning and crisis planning for today's program. Again, this is recorded. It will be available on the Chamber's YouTube channel. I also will be sharing it on some of our platforms and in our e-newsletter. You can visit northeastberkschamber.com to find our digital directory so that you can access both Ben and Russell through the business directory or any other experts in the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good program. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Hey Russ, it was good. I don't know if you saw our comment, but our partners down there in King of Prussia, he was trimming trees after that storm last week and fell off the top of a ladder. And we're going to be trying to help them. Al has to go to Philly tomorrow to do some testing at the airport for them. But it's a husband and wife. They have no part-time help. They started their business a year after us. So keep Rob in your prayers. I know he has broken ribs, collapsed lung, broken clavicle, and he had some spinal surgery Friday, and it's going to be a long haul. So.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sorry to hear
we were
that.
Talking the planning, it was like
Yeah.
it hit home.
Yeah, and that's really what a lot of what I'm talking about. I mean, is just those are the things that happen in life,
Because they have no part-time help.
Right. So now is not a good time to start looking for part-time help.
No, they called us in a panic to see if she called in a panic.
Yeah.
We're going to help where we can, but we're picking up our business is picking up, so we can only do so much.
Right. No, that's why it's so important to have these things documented. And, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I don't have a lot of this stuff documented either, but it's part of what I'm working on. It's one of my business goals right now. But it's just crucially important.
Yeah, when you started saying that, it's like, wow, what timing.
Yeah. Well, I hope he has a speedy recovery.
Yeah, thanks. It's good.
Thank
Great
you all.
presentation.
Thanks. Take care. Have a good day.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.